Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Poor little girl fixes millionaire's Mustang when he sees the ring on her finger. In the quiet little town of Harrisonville, nestled between green hills and winding roads, the seasons stretched peacefully, like an old blues record playing on a tired record player. Here, people still greeted each other in the street. Dogs ran off leash, and the smell of warm pie wafted from the kitchens in the afternoon. It was a timeless place, attached to its traditions, and sometimes a little blind to discreet suffering. At the end of a cul-de-sac lined with century-old maple trees, there was a small wooden house with peeling shutters but a well-kept garden. This is where he lived. Emily Parker, a 10-year-old girl with a lively mind and a curious gaze, always with a screwdriver or a rusty spring in her pocket. She had this way of looking at things as if she wanted to understand their heart. Emily was a child bursting with life, with a brightness in her voice that betrayed precocious maturity. But beneath this vibrancy, she carried the weight of a life marked too early by loss. Her mother, Sarah Parker, a sweet and beloved schoolteacher, had died of a devastating cancer when Emily was barely 3 years old. Her father, unable to cope with his grief, had passed away soon after, leaving Emily in the care of her maternal grandmother, Martha, a woman with a hunched back but a straight gaze, who had raised her granddaughter with the discreet strength of Southern women. Martha's house was modest, sometimes cold in winter, sometimes too quiet at night. But it exuded simple love, the kind you don't always say out loud, but show in gestures. Martha had never spoken much about Sarah's death. It was a pain wrapped in respectful silence. She said simply, "We're holding on, my dear. Because in life, there's what we lose and what we decide to build." Every afternoon after school, Emily would come straight home, drop off her bag, put on a pair of old, oil-stained overalls, and join her grandmother in the small workshop behind the house. There, in a room cluttered with old tools, disassembled radios, and bicycle wheels, Emily rediscovered a world she understood. She fixed everything she was given: toasters, hairdryers, rickety tricycles. It wasn't much, but the few dollars they received here and there allowed them to make ends meet without begging. She had learned every move with Henry Parker, her grandfather, a former mechanic of the old school. Before dying of a heart attack in his garage, he had passed on to her a precious gift, that of never underestimating the power of hands that work and brains that observe. Emily would listen to him for hours, fascinated by his ability to revive a tired engine or to guess the problem with a car just by hearing its mechanical hiss. Since then, she spent her nights reading engineering books in the school library, taking apart alarm clocks to understand their mechanisms, and dreaming of one day building her own inventions. She would sometimes say to Martha, holding a bolt between her dirty fingers, "You'll see, Grandma, one day I'll build something so strong that nothing will be able to break, not even hearts." And Martha smiled, a tired but proud smile, running a wrinkled hand through Emily's hair. The world around them moved fast, changed, and forgot people like them. But in this house tilted slightly by time, two women, one young, the other aging, held together. And every screw Emily tightened, every appliance she repaired, was a silent promise that one day, the little girl from Harrisonville would be known not for what she owned, but for what she could do. One autumn day, as the maple trees shed their golden leaves onto the crisp sidewalks of Willow Street, the wind carried with it a smell of damp earth and wood fire. The sky was a luminous gray, laden with clouds that moved quickly, as if in a hurry to get somewhere else. It was one of those days when the light seems suspended in time, when the city breathes slowly. In the distance, the roar of an engine cut through the silence. A gleaming car cut through the street in a flash of bright red. A 1967 Ford Mustang fastback, spotless, shining like a jewel in the sun. It made its way through the dust and dead leaves before suddenly stalling, coughing with a metallic rattle just in front of the Parker house. The noise caught the attention of Emily, who was kneeling on the porch, repairing an old fan. She looked up, squinted, and regarded the car with a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. The Mustang had no place here. It was a rare and valuable collector's item, a far cry from the tired pickups and battered sedans of the neighborhood. The door opened with a sharp click, and a man got out, James Whitman. A straight figure, silver hair neatly combed back, an Italian wool coat draped over a tailored suit. His shoes, made of shiny black leather, crunched against the gravel as if he were walking on office carpet. Everything about him exuded the confidence of the powerful. He pulled a luxurious watch from his sleeve and looked at the time, visibly irritated. He walked a few steps around the car, opened the hood, and quickly looked at the engine like a man who fancies himself competent, but whose gestures betrayed impatience more than knowledge. Then, scanning the surroundings, he saw Emily's frail figure. She was wearing overalls, her cheeks blackened with grease, a screwdriver in her hand, her elbows grazed. She stared at the scene with silent intensity. James raised his eyebrows, amused and a little mocking. "Little girl, do you think you can help me?" he said, a half-smile on his lips. "This car is a rare gem, not a toy." He expected her to look away, intimidated, like many adults in front of him. But Emily didn't flinch. She stood, wiped her hands on an old rag she wore at her waist, then calmly walked down the porch steps. She approached, straight, with a kind of instinctive calm that came neither from pride nor insolence, but from that quiet certainty that children have who have learned to survive. "I can try, sir," she replied, "that I know cars well. My grandfather taught me everything." James, though amused, was also in a hurry. He glanced at his Swiss watch, a rare piece given away at a gala in Tokyo, then sighed. He had no time for childish things. But something, perhaps Emily's unusual serenity or the quiet confidence she exuded, made him nod. "All right, go ahead, impress me." Emily didn't answer. She gently placed her rag on the bumper and knelt down by the Mustang. At that moment, she was no longer a child facing a billionaire, but a technician facing a machine. Her fingers slid along the hood, as if to feel the engine's pulse before even opening it. She reached up, unlocked the latch, and lifted the hood with a fluid, almost ceremonial gesture. The engine, pristine black, gleamed in the autumn light. Emily leaned down, her face lit by the metallic reflection. She scanned the cables, the battery terminals, the connections, with a look James immediately recognized, that of a mind that sees beyond the surface. She brushed a connector with her fingertips, frowning slightly. Then she reached for a small, unplugged cable dangling slightly near the ignition coil, that a tiny thread, but essential. "There's the culprit," she whispered almost to herself. She reattached it precisely, adjusted the terminal with a wrench she had kept on her belt, then gently tapped 2 more connections. These weren't grand gestures, just accuracy, that of someone who listens before acting. When she straightened up, a little grease on her cheek, she wiped her hands on her trousers and said calmly, "Try now, sir." James raised an eyebrow. He climbed into the Mustang skeptically, turned the key in the ignition, and the engine immediately roars to life, in a deep, full, and fluid vibration, like an awakened wild animal. He stood there frozen, for a long moment, his hands on the steering wheel, his mouth half open. He turned off the engine and slowly got out of the vehicle, his gaze fixed on the little girl who was waiting for him silently, her arms crossed in the autumn cold. "You're amazing, Emily. How did you learn to do that?" There was no more mockery in his voice, just surprise, admiration, and that genuine amazement that only truly unexpected moments provoke. Emily looked down a little, blushing slightly. "My grandfather. He was a mechanic. He taught me everything before he left. He said an engine is like a heart. If you listen to him carefully, you know what it needs." She hesitated for a second, then added, in a softer voice, "I often repair things at home. Bicycles, radios, bread machines, a toaster too, once, which smoked as soon as you plugged it in. My grandmother says I have miracle hands." James stared at her, struck by this fascinating contradiction. A child from a forgotten neighborhood, dressed in old clothes, capable of taming a rare engine that few engineers would dare touch. It wasn't luck. It was raw talent, finesse, patience. And, at the bottom of all this, something even more precious. Love, that of a grandfather who had passed on more than knowledge, and of a grandmother who had nurtured this child's confidence in a world that had promised her nothing. James felt something stir inside him, an emotion he didn't know well. Not pity, not charity, respect. He took a step back, still in shock. "Don't you want to be a mechanic one day?" he asked, a genuine smile finally on his lips. Emily looked up at him with the brightness of well-kept dreams. No, sir. I want to be an engineer. Design things. Invent them. Maybe even cars like yours, but even better. James nodded slowly. You can. I believe you can, Emily Parker. While Amila sat up, patting the dust on her knees with the nonchalance of a child accustomed to getting her hands dirty to do what needs to be done, James Whitman stood there, arms crossed, silent, his gaze still fixed on the engine, which purred like a reassured wild animal. But soon, his eyes detached themselves from the hood to rest on Emily's left hand. She was thin, still childish, a little scratched, with short nails stained with oil. But what caught his attention was this simple ring, discreet, a fine pale gold wedding band, worn by time, almost too big for Emily's fingers. It was unremarkable at first glance, and yet it stood out, like a fragile promise in a harsh world. James stared at her, his eyes narrowed. This ring, does it have a story? He asked, this time without irony, with an unusually soft, almost fragile voice. Emily stopped. The wind blew gently, lifting a dead leaf that brushed against her feet. She looked down at her hand, then back down at the ground, as if the question awakened something she held preciously within herself. She spoke slowly, without trying to embellish. It was my mom's ring. She paused, her fingers gently playing with the ring. She left when I was a baby. I don't really remember her. Just her voice, maybe. Or her scent. I don't know if it's a real memory or something my heart invented. She looked up at James, and he saw, in that gaze, a disarming lucidity. My grandmother gave it to me on my 7th birthday. She told me that even if you don't have much money, love is the most precious thing. That this ring was a promise. A way to never forget what really matters. A silence fell, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a dense silence, vibrant, like those that precede tears or important decisions. James didn't speak. He felt a warmth slowly rising within him, an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. His mind brought him back, despite himself, to an old farmhouse in Virginia, where he grew up, before the glass towers, the private jet trips, the business dinners. He remembered his own mother, Marjorie Whitman, a strong and loving woman, with a clear laugh, always with her hands full of flour or flowers, and who also wore a small golden ring. She had kept it all her life, even when her husband had abandoned them. She said, "It's not the gold that matters, Jamie. It's what it carries. A story, a memory, a truth." James felt a lump in his throat. He looked away briefly, embarrassed by the vulnerability he didn't like to show. But Emily stood there, straight and proud, without trying to move him or complain. She hadn't asked for anything. She had just offered a part of her world. And in this world, despite the poverty, despite the absences, the essentials still lived: transmission, memory, love. James then understood that this little girl, without knowing it, had just reminded him of something he had buried under contracts, profits, appearances. She wasn't wearing any jewelry. She was wearing a legacy. He inhaled slowly. "You know, Emily." He hesitated, searching for words. "My mother wore a ring like that too. She had nothing, but she gave me everything that made me who I am. I maybe forgot that along the way." He smiled softly, a smile without a mask. "And you remind me of it today? With your eyes. With your hands. With this ring." Emily nodded, touched, but didn't reply. She wasn't used to receiving compliments. She preferred to do, rather than talking. James knelt down next to her and looked straight into her eyes. "Never let this world tell you that you are worthless. You already have what many spend their entire lives searching for, and what you carry is worth more than all the gold I have ever created." And in this suspended moment, between a little girl in overalls and a businessman dressed to measure, a scene was being played out that was invisible to the eyes of the world, the one where two solitudes recognize, without too many words, their shared humanity. In the days following this unexpected meeting, James Whitman failed to hunt Emily Parker off his thoughts. He had thought, at first, that this moment would pass, that he would forget this little girl with the oil-stained hands and the gaze too serious for her age. But every time he climbed into his Mustang, the engine purring beneath his fingers, he heard Emily's words. And every time he looked at her spreadsheets of numbers, her impersonal meeting rooms, her calibrated speeches at prestigious conferences, he felt an emptiness growing inside him, a void that a simple child's gaze had awakened. A week later, He returned to the poor neighborhood of Willow Street, not in a Mustang, but on foot, without a driver, hands in his pockets, without warning. He knocked on the door of the Parkers' house, a little nervous. Martha Emily's grandmother opened the door. She squinted, surprised to see this tall man in a gray wool coat on her front steps. "Is Miss Parker available?" he asked, a shy smile on his lips. Emily arrived a few seconds later, her hair tied back, a wrench still in her hand. She said nothing, just stared at him questioningly. James took a deep breath, then spoke to her with rare frankness. "Emily, I want to help you." He knelt almost to her level, in a posture that contrasted with his usual stature. "I'll finance your education. Not just high school, but all the way through college. Everything. Books, materials, travel if necessary. You want to be an engineer? Then you will. I want you to have the best possible opportunity." A silence greeted her words. Martha slowly brought a hand to her mouth. Emily took a step back, as if she'd misunderstood. She squinted, searching for the joke, the trap, the doubt. "Why me?" she breathed. James didn't try to embellish. "Because you reminded me of something essential. Because you have talent, determination, and you don't ask for anything from anyone. You deserve this chance, Emily, and I can give it to you." Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. It was she who spoke, her voice trembling. "Mr. Whitman, I don't know what to say. We've never had this kind of miracle in our lives." "It's not a miracle," James replied softly. "It's soft recognition." This gesture not only changed their material situation, he transformed the very energy of their daily lives. Emily no longer walked to school like she used to. She now carried her bag like a promise. She raised her hand in class with the confidence of someone who knows her dream has a future. She spent hours reading, taking apart old objects, but also writing letters to engineering schools, imagining plans for quieter, more environmentally friendly engines. And above all, she never forgot to help his grandmother at the end of the day. James, for his part, didn't stop there. The encounter with Emily had triggered a deeper wave in him. He discovered that in his own town, dozens, hundreds, of bright children were being held back by poverty. So he launched the Whitman Foundation for Talent, an educational program that identified and supported high-potential young people in disadvantaged areas. He didn't want to be a man who built towers anymore. He wanted to build destinies. He often returned to the Parkers' house, not as a benefactor, but as a friend. He made a habit of bringing Emily technical books or chatting with Martha on the porch over tea. Emily soon called him Mr. James, and then, one day, simply James. And when he attended, a few years later, the Emily's graduation speech, in a crowded amphitheater, he was the first to stand up when the whole room applauded. She spoke clearly, with force, and always carried in her left hand the old golden ring, more precious than any distinction. Emily Parker became not only an engineer, but also a living symbol of resilience for Harrisonville. She started her own business, employed local youth, and became a mentor herself. The circle was complete, but it never closed. It expanded. James, for his part, finally found a meaning that neither wealth nor fame could offer him, that of transmitting. This story is not just about a repaired engine. This is the story of a heart that restarts, of a destiny that changes, and of a human bond that goes beyond classes, ages, and appearances. This is proof that sometimes, all it takes is to listen to someone you weren't expecting to change two lives, maybe even hundreds.